There we go. That's better. Fix my mic. No longer falling off by hanging on by a thread. Still kind of funky though, actually, but better than it was before. Hey, we take improvements here. All right, let's try this again. We're gonna wait 1 minute and then we'll get down to business. I think we're at a good volume. Today's going to be a little bit of a shorter read. I'm going to read 3 chapters. The first 2 are quite short, and then the third is a little bit more on the average side, but still kind of short. So I feel like this might be more of like a 30-minute to 40-minute read, which honestly is okay because it is still super hot, even though the sky is filled with wildfire smoke. It is humid today, and I can't turn the AC on while I read because you can hear it. Can't win them all. All right, another like 20 seconds or so, and then we'll get down to business. Thanks for bearing with me. All right. Back to Deathworld by Harry Harrison. Move my mic just a wee bit closer. Just a little bit closer, you know? All right, there we go. Chapter 10. There were empty rooms in one of the computer buildings. These were completely sealed to keep stray animal life out of the delicate machinery. While Meta checked a bedroll out of stores, Jason painfully dragged a desk, table, and chairs in from a nearby empty office. When she returned with a pneumatic bed, he instantly dropped on it with a grateful sigh. Her lip curled a bit at his obvious weakness. "Get used to the sight," he said. "I intend to do as much of my work as I can while maintaining a horizontal position. You will be my strong right arm. And right now, right arm, I wish you could scare me up something to eat. I also intend to do most of my eating in the previously mentioned prone condition." Snorting with disgust, Meta stamped out. While she was gone, Jason chewed the end of a stylus thoughtfully, then made some careful notes. After they had finished the almost tasteless meal, he began the search. "Meta, where can I find historical records of Pyrrus?" "I've never heard of any. I really don't know." "But there has to be something, somewhere," he insisted. "Even if your present-day culture devotes all of its time and energies to survival, you can be sure it wasn't always that way. All the time it was developing, people were keeping records, making notes. Now where do we look? Do you have a library here?" "Of course," she said. "We have an excellent technical library, but I'm sure there wouldn't be any of that sort of thing there." Trying not to groan, Jason stood up. "Let me be the judge of that. Just lead the way." Operation of the library was completely automatic. A projected index gave the call number for any text that had to be consulted. The tape was delivered to the charge desk 30 seconds after the number had been punched. Returned tapes were dropped through a hopper and refiled automatically. The mechanism worked smoothly. "Wonderful," Jason said, pushing away from the index. "A tribute to technological ingenuity. Only, it contains nothing of any value to us. Just reams of textbooks." "What else should be in a library?" Meta sounded sincerely puzzled. Jason started to explain, then changed his mind. "Later, we'll get into that," he said. "Much later. Now we have to find a lead. Is it possible that there are any tapes or even printed books that aren't filed through this machine?" "It seems unlikely, but we could ask Paulie. He lives here somewhere and is in charge of the library, filing new books and tending the machinery." The single door into the rear of the building was locked, and no amount of pounding could rouse the caretaker. "If he's alive, this should do it," Jason said. He pressed the out-of-order button on the control panel. It had the desired effect. Within 5 minutes, the door opened, and Paulie dragged himself through it. Death usually came swiftly on Pyrrus. If wounds slowed a man down, the ever-ready forces of destruction quickly finished the job. Polly was the exception to this rule. Whatever had attacked him originally had done an efficient job. Most of the lower part of his face was gone. His left arm was curled and useless. The damage to his body and legs had left him with the bare capability to stumble from one spot to the next. Yet he still had one good arm, as well as his eyesight. He could work in the library and relieve a fully fit man. How long he had been dragging the useless husk of a body around the building, no one knew. In spite of the pain that filled his red-rimmed, moist eyes, he had stayed alive. Growing old, older than any Pyrran as far as Jason had seen, he tottered forward and turned off the alarm that had called him. When Jason started to explain, the old man took no notice. Only after the librarian had rummaged a hearing aid out of his clothes did Jason realize he was deaf as well. Jason explained again what he searched for. Polly nodded and printed his answer on a tablet. There are many old books in the storerooms below. Most of the building was taken up by the robot filing and sorting apparatus. They moved slowly through the banks of machinery, following the crippled librarian to a barred door in the rear. He pointed to it. While Jason and Meta fought to open the age-encrusted bars, he wrote another note on his tablet. Not opened for many years. Rats. Jason's and Meta's guns appeared reflexively in their hands as they read the message. Jason finished opening the door by himself. The two native Pyrrans stood facing the opening gap. It was well that they did. Jason could never have handled what came through that door. He didn't even open it for himself. Their sounds at the door must have attracted all the vermin in the lower part of the building. Jason had thrown the last bolt and started to pull on the handle when the door was pushed open from the other side. Open the gateway to hell and see what comes out. Meta and Polly stood shoulder to shoulder, firing into the mass of loathsomeness that boiled through the door. Jason jumped to one side and picked off the occasional animal that came his way. The destruction seemed to go on forever. Long minutes passed before the last clawed beast made its death rush. Meta and Polly waited expectantly for more. They were happily excited by this chance to deal destruction. Jason felt a little sick after the silent, ferocious attack. The ferocity that the Pyrrans reflected. He saw a scratch on Meta's face where one of the beasts had caught her. She seemed oblivious to it. Pulling out his medikit, Jason circled the piled bodies. Something stirred in their midst and a crashing shot plowed into it. Then he reached the girl and pushed the analyzer probes against the scratch. The machine clicked and Meta jumped as the antitoxin needle stabbed down. She realized for the first time what Jason was doing. "Thank you," she said. Polly had a powerful battery lamp, and by unspoken agreement, Jason carried it. Crippled though he was, the old man was still a Pyrran when it came to handling a gun. They slowly made their way down the refuse-laden stairs. "What a stench!" Jason grimaced. At the foot of the stairs, they looked around. There had been books and records here at one time. They had been systematically chewed, eaten, and destroyed for decades. "I like the care you take with your old books," Jason said, disgustedly. "They could have been of no importance," Meta said coolly, "or they would have been filed correctly in the library upstairs." Jason wandered gloomily through the rooms. Nothing remained of any value. Fragments and scraps of writing and printing, never enough in one spot to bother collecting. With the toe of one armored boot, he kicked angrily at a pile of debris, ready to give up the search. There was a glint of rusty metal under the dirt. "Hold this!" He gave the light to Meta and began scratching aside the rubble. A flat metal box with a dial lock built into it was revealed. "Why, that's a log box," Meta said, surprised. "Just what I thought," Jason said. Chapter 11. Resealing the cellar, they carried the box back to Jason's new office. Only after spraying with decontaminant did they examine it closely. Meta picked out engraved letters on the lid. S.T. Pollock's Victory. That must be the name of the spacer this log came from. I don't recognize the class or whatever it is the initials S.T. stand for. "Stellar transport," Jason told her as he tried the lock mechanism. I've heard of them, but I've never seen one. They were built during the last wave of galactic expansion. Really, nothing more than gigantic metal containers put together in space. After they were loaded with people, machinery, and supplies, they would be towed to whatever planetary system had been chosen, and then these same tugs and one-shot rockets would break the STs in for a landing, then leave them there. The hull was a ready source of metal, and the colonists could start right in building their new world. And they were big. All of them held at least 50,000 people. Only after he said it did he realize the significance of his words. Meta's deadly stare drove it home. There were now less people on Pyrrus than had been in the original settlement. And human population, without rigid birth controls, usually increased geometrically. Jason dinAlt suddenly remembered Meta's itchy trigger finger. But we can't be sure how many people were aboard this one, he said hurriedly. Or even if this is the log of the ship that settled Pyrrus. Can you find something to pry this open with? The lock is corroded into a single lump. Meta took her anger out on the box. Her fingers managed to force a gap between lid and bottom. She wrenched at it. Rusty metal screeched and tore. The lid came off in her hands, and a heavy book thudded to the table. The cover legend destroyed all doubt. Log of St. Pollux victory. Outward bound, Satani to Pyrrus, 55,000 settlers aboard. Meta couldn't argue now. She stood behind Jason with tight clenched fists and read over his shoulder as he turned the brittle, yellowed pages. He quickly skipped through the opening part that covered the sailing preparations and trip out. Only when he had reached the actual landing did he start reading slowly. The impact of the ancient words leaped out at him. Here it is, Jason shouted. Proof positive that we're on the right trail. Even you will have to admit that. Read it, right here. Second day since the tugs left. We are completely on our own now. The settlers still haven't grown used to this planet, though we have orientation talks every night, as well as the morale agents who I have working 20 hours a day. I suppose I really can't blame the people. They all lived in the underways of Satani, and I doubt if they saw the sun once a year. This planet has weather with a vengeance, worse than anything I've seen on 100 other planets. Was I wrong during the original planning stages not to insist on settlers from one of the agrarian worlds? People who could handle the outdoors. These citified Satanians are afraid to go out in the rain. But of course, they have adapted completely to their native 1.5 gravity, so the 2G here doesn't bother them much. That was the factor that decided us. Anyway, too late now to do anything about it. Or about the unending cycle of rain, snow, hail, hurricanes, and such. Answer will be to start the mines going, sell the metals, and build completely enclosed cities. The only thing on this forsaken planet that isn't actually against us are the animals. A few large predators at first, but the guards made short work of them. The rest of the wildlife leaves us alone. Glad of that. They've been fighting for existence so long that I've never seen a more deadly-looking collection. Even the little rodents, no bigger than a man's hand, are armored like tanks. I don't believe a word of it, Meta broke in. That can't be Pyrrus he's writing about. Her words died away as Jason wordlessly pointed to the title on the cover. He continued scanning the pages, flipping them quickly. A sentence caught his eye and he stopped. Jamming his finger against the place, he read aloud. And troubles keep piling up. First, Harpello with his theory about the volcanism is so close to the surface that the ground keeps warm and the crops grow so well. Even if he is right, what can we do? We must be self-dependent if we intend to survive. And now this other thing. It seems that the forest fire drove a lot of new species our way. Animals, insects, and even birds have attacked the people. Note for Har, check if possible seasonal migration might explain the attacks. There have been 14 deaths from wounds and poisoning. We'll have to reinforce the rules for insect lotion at all times, and I suppose build some kind of perimeter defense to keep the larger beasts out of the camp. This is a beginning, Jason said. At least now we are aware of the real nature of the battle we're engaged in. It doesn't make Pyrrus any easier to handle, or make the life forms less dangerous to know that they were once better disposed towards mankind. All this does is point the way. Something took the peaceful life forms, shook them up, and turned this planet into one big death trap for mankind. That something is what I want to uncover. Chapter break here, so I'm gonna get some water. Hang tight. Did I say 13? I meant 12. Anyway, chapter 12. Further reading of the log produced no new evidence. There was a good deal more information about the early animal and plant life and how deadly they were, as well as the first defenses against them. Interesting, historically, but of no use whatsoever in countering the menace. The captain apparently never thought that life forms were altering on Pyrrus, believing instead that dangerous beasts were being discovered. He never lived to change his mind. The last entry in the log, less than 2 months after the first attack, was very brief, and in a different handwriting. Captain Kukowski died today of poisoning following an insect bite. His death is greatly mourned. The why of the planetary revulsion had yet to be uncovered. Kirk must see this book, Jason said. He should have some idea of the progress being made. Can we get transportation, or do we walk to City Hall? Walk, of course, Meta said. Then you bring the book. At 2 Gs, I find it very hard to be a gentleman and carry the packages. They had just entered Kirk's outer office when a shrill screaming burst out of the phone screen. It took Jason a moment to realize that it was a mechanical signal, not a human voice. What is it? He asked. Kirk burst through the door and headed for the street entrance. Everyone else in the office was going the same way. Meta looked confused, leaning towards the door, then looking back at Jason. What does it mean? Can't you tell me? He shook her arm. Sector alarm. A major breakthrough of some kind at the perimeter. Everyone but other perimeter guards has to answer. Well, go then, he said. Don't worry about me. I'll be all right. His words acted like a trigger release. Meta's gun was in her hand, and she was gone before he had finished speaking. Jason sat down, wearily, in the deserted office. The unnatural silence in the building began to get on his nerves. He shifted his chair over to the phone screen and switched it on to receive. The screen exploded with color and sound. At first, Jason could make no sense of it at all. Just a confused jumble of faces and voices. It was a multi-channel set designed for military use. A number of images were carried on the screen at one time, rows of heads or hazy backgrounds where the user had left the field of view. Many of the heads were talking at the same time, and the babble of their voices made no sense whatsoever. After examining the controls and making a few experiments, Jason began to understand the operation. Though all stations were on the screen at all times, their audio channels could be controlled. In that way, 2, 3, or more stations could be hooked up together in a link-up. They would be in round-robin communication with each other, yet never out of contact with the other stations. Identification between voice and sound was automatic. Whenever one of the pictured images spoke, the image would glow red. By trial and error, Jason brought in the audio for the stations he wanted and tried to follow the course of the attack. Very quickly, he realized that this was something out of the ordinary. Whenever one of the pictured images spoke, the image would glow red. Very quickly, he realized that this was something out of the ordinary. In some way, no one made it clear. A section of the perimeter had been broken through, and emergency defenses had to be thrown up to encapsulate it. Kirk seemed to be in charge. At least he was the only one with an override transmitter. He used it for general commands. The many tiny images faded, and his face appeared on top of them, filling the entire screen. All perimeter stations, send 25% of your complement to Area 12. The small images reappeared, and the babble increased, red lights flickering from face to face. Abandon the first floor. Acid bombs can't reach. If we hold, we'll be cut off, but salient has passed us on the west flank. Request support. Don't Merv! It's useless! And the napalm tanks are almost gone. Orders! The truck is still there. Get it to the supply warehouse. You'll find replacements. Out of the welter of talk, only the last 2 fragments made any sense. Jason had noticed the signs below when he came in. The first 2 floors of the building below him were jammed with military supplies. This was his chance to get into the act. Just sitting and watching was frustrating, particularly when it was a desperate emergency. He didn't overvalue his worth, but he was sure there was always room for another gun. By the time he had dragged himself down to the street level, a turbo truck had slammed to a stop in front of the loading platform. 2 Pyrrans were rolling out drums of napalm with reckless disregard for their own safety. Jason didn't dare enter that maelstrom of rolling metal. He found he could be of use tugging the heavy drums into position on the truck while the others rolled them up. They accepted his aid without acknowledgement. It was exhausting, sweaty work, hauling the leaden drums into place against the heavy gravity. After a minute, Jason worked by touch through a red haze of hammering blood. He realized the job was done only when the truck suddenly leapt forward and he was thrown to the floor. He lay there, his chest heaving. As the driver hurled the heavy vehicle along, all Jason could do was bounce around in the bottom. He could see well enough, but was still gasping for breath when they braked at the fighting zone. To Jason, it was a scene of incredible confusion. Guns firing, flamers, men and women running on all sides. The napalm drums were unloaded without his help, and the truck vanished for more. Jason leaned against a wall of a half-destroyed building and tried to get his bearings. It was impossible. There seemed to be a great number of small animals. He killed 2 that attacked him. Other than that, he couldn't determine the nature of the battle. A Pyrran, tan face white with pain and exertion, stumbled up. His right arm, wet with raw flesh and dripping blood, hung limply at his side. It was covered with freshly applied surgical foam. He held his gun in his left hand, a stump of control cable dangling from it. Jason thought the man was looking for medical aid. He couldn't have been more wrong. Clenching the gun in his teeth, the Pyrran clutched a barrel of napalm with his good hand and hurled it over on its side. Then with the gun once more in his hand, he began to roll the drum along the ground with his feet. It was slow, cumbersome work, but he was still in the fight. Jason pushed through the hurrying crowd and bent over the drum. "Let me do it," he said. "You can cover us both with your gun." The man wiped the sweat from his eyes with the back of his arm, and blinked at Jason. He seemed to recognize him. When he smiled, it was a grimace of pain, empty of humor. "Do that. I can still shoot. 2 half men? Maybe we equal 1 whole." Jason was laboring too hard to even notice the insult. An explosion had blasted a raw pit in the street ahead. 2 people were at the bottom, digging it even deeper with shovels. The whole thing seemed meaningless. Just as Jason and the wounded man rolled up the drum, the diggers leaped out of the excavation and began shooting down into its depths. One of them turned, a young girl, barely in her teens. "Praise perimeter," she breathed. "They found the napalm. One of the new horrors is breaking through towards 13. We just found it." Even as she talked, she swiveled the drum around, kicked the easy-off plug, and began dumping the gelid contents into the hole. When half of it had gurgled down, she kicked the drum itself in. Her companion pulled a flare from his belt, lit it, and threw it after the drum. "Back quick! They don't like the heat," he said. This was putting it very mildly. The napalm caught, tongues of flame and roiling, greasy smoke climbed up to the sky. Under Jason's feet, the earth shifted and moved. Something black and long stirred in the heart of the flame, then arched up into the sky over their heads. In the midst of the searing heat, it still moved with alien, jolting motions. It was immense, at least 2 meters thick, and with no indication of its length. The flames didn't stop it at all, just annoyed it. Jason had some idea of the thing's length as the street cracked and buckled for 50 meters on each side of the pit. Great loops of the creature began to emerge from the ground. He fired his gun, as did the others. Not that it seemed to have any effect. More and more people were appearing, armed with a variety of weapons. Flamethrowers and grenades seemed to be the most effective. "Clear the area! We're going to saturate it! Fall back!" The voice was so loud, it jarred Jason's ear. He turned and recognized Kirk, who had arrived with truckloads of equipment. He had a power speaker on his back. The mic hung in front of his lips. His amplified voice brought an instant reaction from the crowd. They began to move. There was still doubt in Jason's mind what to do. Clear the area? But what area? He started towards Kirk before he realized that the rest of the Pyrrans were going in the opposite direction. Even under 2 gravities, they moved. Jason had a naked feeling of being alone on the stage. He was in the center of the street, and the others had vanished. No one remained, except the wounded man Jason had helped. He stumbled towards Jason, waving his good arm. Jason couldn't understand what he said. Kirk was shouting orders again from one of the trucks. They had started to move too. The urgency struck home, and Jason started to run. It was too late. On all sides, the earth was buckling, cracking, as more loops of the underground thing forced its way into the light. Safety lay ahead, only in front of it rose an arch of dirt-encrusted gray. There are seconds of time that seem to last an eternity, a moment of subjective time that is grabbed and stretched to an infinite distance. This was one of those moments. Jason stood, frozen. Even the smoke in the sky hung unmoving. The high-standing loop of alien life was before him, every detail piercingly clear. Thick as a man, ribbed and gray as old bark, tendrils projected from all parts of it, pallid and twisting lengths that writhed slowly with snake-like life. Shaped like a plant, yet with the motions of an animal, and cracking, splitting. This was the worst. Seams and openings appeared, splintering, gaping mouths that vomited out a horde of pallid animals. Jason heard their shriekings, shrill yet remote. He saw the needle-like teeth that lined their jaws. The paralysis of the unknown held him there. He should have died. Kirk was thundering at him through the power speaker. Others were firing into the attacking creature. Jason knew nothing. Then he was shot forward, pushed by a rock-hard shoulder. The wounded man was still there, trying to get Jason clear. Gun clenched in his jaws, he dragged Jason along with his good arm towards the creature. The others stopped firing. They saw his plan, and it was a good one. The loop of the thing arched into the air, leaving an opening between its body and the ground. The wounded Pyrrus planted his feet and tightened his muscles. One-handed, with a single thrust, he picked Jason off the ground and sent him hurtling under the living arch. Moving tendrils brushed fire along his face. Then he was through, rolling over and over on the ground. The wounded Pyrrus leapt after him. It was too late. There had been a chance for one person to get out. The Pyrrus could have done it easily. Instead, he had pushed Jason first. The thing was aware of movement when Jason brushed its tendrils. It dropped and caught the wounded man under its weight. He vanished from sight as the tendrils wrapped around him and the animals swarmed over him. His trigger must have pulled back to full automatic because the gun kept firing a long time after he should have been dead. Jason crawled. Some of the fanged animals ran towards him, but were shot. He knew nothing about this. Then rude hands grabbed him up and pulled him forward. He slammed into the side of a truck, and Kirk's face was in front of his, flushed and angry. One of the giant fists closed on the front of Jason's clothes, and he was lifted off his feet, shaken like a limp bag of rags. He offered no protest, and could not have, even if Kirk had killed him. When he was thrown to the ground, someone picked him up and slid him into the back of the truck. He did not lose consciousness as the truck bounced away, yet he could not move. In a moment, the fatigue would go away, and he would sit up. That was all he was, just a little tired. Even as he thought this, he passed out. That's the end of chapter 12. All right, maybe one more. One more. Just give me a minute for a quick water break. It's getting hot. I'm stifled in this makeshift booth. Also, I feel like maybe I need to turn the music up. I'm not sure. I'm going to do so. I don't know. All right, I will be back in about, a minute. All right, back to it. Chapter 13. All right. Just like old times, Jason said when Bruco came into the room with a tray of food. Without a word, Bruco served Jason and the wounded men in the other beds, then left. Thanks, Jason called after his retreating back. A joke, a twist of a grin, like it always was. Sure, but even as he grinned and his lips shaped a joke, Jason felt them like a veneer on the outside. Something plastered on with a life of its own. Inside, he was numb and immovable. His body was stiff as his eyes still watched that arch of alien flesh descend and smother the one-armed Pyrrus with its million burning fingers. He could feel himself under the arch. After all, hadn't the wounded man taken his place? He finished the meal without realizing that he ate. Ever since that morning, when he had recovered consciousness, it had been like this. He knew that he should have died out there in that battle-torn street. His life should have been snuffed out for making the mistake of thinking that he could actually help the battling Pyrrans, instead of being underfoot and in the way. If it hadn't been for Jason, the man with the wounded arm would have been brought here to the safety of the reorientation buildings. He knew he was lying in the bed that belonged to that man. The man who had given his life for Jason's. The man whose name he didn't even know. There were drugs in the food, and they made him sleep. The medicated pads soaked the pain and rawness out of the burns where the tentacles had seared his face. When he awoke the second time, his touch with reality had been restored. A man had died so he could live. Jason faced the fact. He couldn't restore that life, no matter how much he wanted to. What he could do was make the man's death worthwhile. If it can be said that any death was worthwhile. He forced his thoughts from that track. Jason knew what he had to do. His work was even more important now. If he could solve the riddle of this deadly world, he could repay in part the debt he owed. Sitting up made his head spin, and he held to the edge of the bed until it slowed down. The others in the room ignored him as he slowly and painfully dragged on his clothes. Bruco came in, saw what he was doing, and left again without a word. Dressing took a long time, but it was finally done. When Jason finally left the room, he found Kirk waiting for him. Kirk, I want to tell you. Tell me nothing! The thunder of Kirk's voice bounced back from the ceiling and walls. I'm telling you. I'll tell you once, and that will be the end of it. You're not wanted on Pyrrus, Jason dinAlt. Neither you nor your previous off-world schemes are wanted here. I let you convince me once with your twisted tongue. Helped you at the expense of more important work. I should have known what the result of your logic would be. Now I've seen. Welf died so you could live. He was twice the man you will ever be. Welf, was that his name? Jason asked stumblingly. I didn't know. You didn't even know. Kirk's lips pulled back from his teeth in a grimace of disgust. You didn't even know his name, yet he died that you might continue your miserable existence. Kirk spat as if the words gave a vile flavor to his speech and stamped toward the exit lock. Almost as an afterthought, he turned back to Jason. You'll stay here in the sealed buildings until the ship returns in 2 weeks. Then you will leave this planet and never come back. If you do, I will kill you instantly. With pleasure. He started through the lock. Wait! Jason shouted. You can't decide like that. You haven't even seen the evidence I've uncovered. Ask Meta. The lock thumped shut, and Kirk was gone. The whole thing was too stupid. Anger began to replace the futile despair of a moment before. He was being treated like an irresponsible child, the importance of his discovery of the law completely ignored. Jason turned and saw for the first time that Bruco was standing there. Did you hear that? Jason asked him. Yes, and I quite agree. You can consider yourself lucky. Lucky? Jason was the angry one now. Lucky to be treated like a moronic child with contempt for everything I do? I said lucky, Bruco snapped. Welf was Kirk's only surviving son. Kirk had high hopes for him, was training him to take his place eventually. He turned to leave, but Jason called after him. Wait! I'm sorry about Welf. I can't be any sorrier knowing that he was Kirk's son, but at least it explains why Kirk is so quick to throw me out. as well as the evidence I have uncovered. The log of the ship. I know. I've seen it, Bruco said. Meta brought it in. Very interesting historical document. That's all you can see it as? An historical document? The significance of the planetary change escapes you? It doesn't escape me, Bruco answered briefly. But I cannot see it has any relevancy today. The past is unchangeable, and we must fight in the present. That is enough to occupy all of our energies. Jason felt too exhausted to argue the point anymore. He had run into the same stone wall with all the Pyrrans. Theirs was a logic of the moment. The past and the future were unchangeable, unknowable, and uninteresting. How's the perimeter battle going? He asked, wanting to change the subject. Finished, or in the last stages at least. Bruco was almost enthusiastic as he showed Jason some stereos of the attackers. He did not notice Jason's repressed shudder. This was one of the most serious breakthroughs in years, but we caught it in time. I hate to think what would have happened if they hadn't been detected for a few weeks more. What are those things? Jason asked. Giant snakes of some kind? Don't be absurd, Bruco snorted. He tapped the stereo with his thumbnail. Roots, that's all. Greatly modified, but still roots. They came in under the perimeter barrier, much deeper than anything we've had before. Not a real threat in themselves, as they have very little mobility. Die soon after being cut. The danger came from their being used as access tunnels. They're bored through and through with animal runs, and 2 or 3 species of beasts live in a sort of symbiosis inside. Now we know what they are, we can watch for them. The danger was they could have completely undermined the perimeter and come in from all sides at once. Not much we could have done then. The edge of destruction, living on the lip of a volcano, the Pyrrans took satisfaction from any day that passed without total annihilation. There seemed to be no way to change their attitude. Jason let the conversation die there. He picked up the log of the Pollux victory from Bruco's quarters and carried it back to his room. The wounded Pyrrans there ignored him as he dropped onto the bed and opened the book to the very first page. For 2 days, he did not leave his quarters. The wounded men were soon gone, and he had the room to himself. Page by page, he went through the log until he knew every detail of the settlement of Pyrrus. His notes and cross-references piled up. He made an accurate map of the original settlement, superimposed over a modern one. They didn't match at all. It was a dead end. With one map held over the other, what he had suspected was painfully clear. The descriptions of terrain and physical features in the log were accurate enough. The city had obviously been moved since the first landing. Whatever records had been kept would be in the library, and he had exhausted that source. Anything else would have been left behind and long since destroyed. Rain lashed against the thick window above his head, lit suddenly by a flare of lightning. The unseen volcanoes were active again, vibrating the floor with their rumblings deep in the earth. The shadow of defeat pressed heavily down on Jason, rounding his shoulders and darkening even more the overcast day. All right, I think we'll stop there for now. Like I said, a little bit of a shorter day, but we'll get back to it next week, along with a new Weird Tales story for us to check out. But in the meantime, thanks for hanging out and, chilling. I appreciate it. And if you're listening later on YouTube, thanks for that too. As always, you can give Aindulmedir a shout out if you like. Give him some love on Bandcamp, YouTube, Spotify. Thanks to him for letting us use his tunes. We listened to the Lunar Lexicon today on Spotify. So yeah, go show him some love. And give me an email if you got any suggestions or comments or questions. Same username as my YouTube at gmail.com. All right, folks, have a good rest of the weekend or week whenever you're listening, and I'll catch you next time. Take it easy.